see you guys in the dark.
I'm a 27-year-old male. I live in the UK with my fiancé and currently work as a teaching assistant for teenagers with special education needs in a school not far from Bradgate Park. I have worked in a number of schools and children's homes now, and these buildings, especially the children's homes, are usually old, renovated houses or halls. This particular story happened in 2013 when I had just started working as a support worker at a care home for teenagers and young adults who aged around 18 to 30 years old, with autism, brain damage, and challenging behaviors. The house that I worked in was pretty big. There were 2 living rooms, a large kitchen, a games room, a study, and 5 bedrooms. There was also a huge garden with a summer house or activity room that led to acres of fields and woodlands. I'd been working there for about 3 weeks and primarily worked the waking night shift. This shift ran from 10 p.m. until 8 a.m., and it was my duty to make sure that all the residents were settled for the night and to get the cleaning done before the day staff came in to take over. I would usually get all of the jobs done for around 1 a.m. and spend the rest of the night listening out for anyone that would wake up. I would watch TV, read my university course books, or sometimes just play games on my phone once I was finished. The residents usually slept all night. On one particular night, a young man named James was particularly restless. He was not very big, but he had a lot of strength behind him when he got into one of his bad moods, and the slightest thing would set him off. He once threw a member of staff through a patio door because she had forgotten to put cold water in his tea before he drank it. He could not form full sentences and would communicate with fairly simple words put together in a way that he understood. For example, he would say something like, "James, make breakfast," when he was ready to make breakfast, or "James, go outside," if he wanted to go out and play. He was generally well behaved and would be quite funny when he wanted to be, but was well known for his temper. At around 11 p.m., James got up and came downstairs to make a drink. I stood in the doorway and watched to make sure that he didn't break anything or hurt himself, and he went upstairs without any real bother. I sat on the top step to keep an eye on his door for maybe about 15 minutes or so, just to make sure that he didn't wake any of the other residents. Once he had settled, I went back to my cleaning. The room beneath James's bedroom was a communal living room with board games, a TV, sofas, books, and stuff like that. I was in there dusting and mopping the floor when I heard something heavy drop onto the floor in the room above me. I knew James was prone to temper tantrums if he got frustrated, so I went upstairs and knocked on his door. As I reached for the key to open it myself, he opened up the door and looked at me. He seemed perfectly calm, and his eyes looked almost half shut, like he had been asleep. I asked him if he was okay. He said yes, put his thumbs up. This was something that he did when he was in a good mood and not stressed out, so I just left him to it and told him to be careful, thinking that he had knocked something over. An hour or so had passed, and by now I was in the kitchen cleaning the sink. I heard another bang right above me, again like something had dropped. This time I realized that the room above the kitchen was currently empty. The house was set up to house 5 residents, but there were only currently 4, and the room above me was the spare empty room. I immediately went to go check it out, but the room was empty. I stood there for a little while, and as far as I could tell, everyone was asleep. Due to the nature of their conditions and behaviors, each resident has an alarm fitted to their door that is activated at night, so if anyone leaves their room, a small receiver box that the night staff carry would make a noise, and the light blinks for a few seconds to indicate which door had been opened. The alarm had not gone off, so I knew that the noise was not from any of the residents. I got back to my cleaning and didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night. The following night, I got to work just before 10, and I entered the hallway. I could tell that something was wrong. James was at the bottom of the stairs, covering his ears and humming loudly. 3 members of staff were with him. After a few minutes, he was escorted to the sitting room, and the house manager gave me a rundown of what had been going on. For the last 4 hours, James has been quite agitated and kept repeating the phrase, "Sarah, little girl," when asked what was wrong with him. This was something that we had never experienced with him before. The general conclusion was that he had seen something on TV or in a movie that stuck in his head and made him repeat this phrase. Once James had settled into bed, the night staff left, and the other members of staff that was sleeping in went up to the staff bedroom. I got on with my tasks, and as usual, finished around 1 a.m. Soon after this, I went upstairs to do a quick check on all of the residents, but as I got on the top floor landing, I noticed that the lights had been turned off. There were 2 small corridors leading to the bedrooms on the left and right-hand side of the staircase. James's room was on the left, and the light switch was just outside of his room. I turned the corner to flick the switch, and there, in the darkness and complete silence, was James. He stood in the corner, completely naked, with his eyes as wide as he possibly could hold them. I'm a big guy, about 6'3", and I weigh about 220 pounds, but at that moment, I was really creeped out. I spoke calmly to James, and asked what was going on. For a while, he said nothing at all. Then as I turned the light back on, he let out an ear-piercing scream, and started slapping himself around the face. The sleeping staff woke up at this point, and helped to calm the situation, and get James back into bed before reassuring the other residents that everything was fine. After that night, I had 4 days off. My shift pattern was 7 days on, 2 days off, followed by 8 days on, and 4 days off. I was relieved that this incident had happened just as my time off began. I got back to work the following week. It was told that the situation with James talking about the little girl had got a lot worse. He would spend hours staring out the window that overlooked the garden, saying, "Little girl, where are you, little girl?" And no one knew where he had heard that phrase. That night around 3 a.m., the alarm went off to say that the door to room 5, the spare room, had been opened. Now this seemed a little bit weird, as the door to the spare room is always kept locked, because it was being used for storage at the time. I went up to investigate, and found James standing there in the room in the dark. He didn't seem to notice me entering, and was just standing there whispering, "Where are you?" over and over again. I gently touched his shoulder, and said something like, "Come on, mate, let's get you back to bed. It's late." James turns around and starts heading back to his room, and for a second I was relieved. But then as I locked the door to the spare room, he screamed out, "Oh no!" and started pummeling the door with both fists. As he did this, the alarm went off to indicate the front door had been opened. The only people with the key to the front door were myself, as the night wake staff, and the house manager. The door has 4 locks on it, 2 that require a key, and 2 that require electronic ID cards. This was now 3:25 a.m., and the manager never came in before 8. So I presumed that there must have been some kind of mistake, and continued to diffuse the situation with James. He finally calmed down, and went back into his room, so I went downstairs to check the front door. To my surprise, it was wide open. I shut it immediately, and started checking every room in the house, just in case someone had got in. I then checked on each of the residents to make sure that they were all still in the house. Everything was just fine. The next night, everything was calm until around 2 a.m. when one of the other residents, Connor, got up and said that someone was tapping on his window. I guessed that he must have just been dreaming, as his window is on the 3rd floor of the house, and was at least 25 feet from the ground. I went back up to his room with him to reassure him, and checked his window. Sure enough, it was shut, and the security lock that prevents it from opening wide enough for anyone to fit through was still sealed. As he got back in bed, I heard footsteps on the stairs outside of his room. He froze for a second, and looked at me with an expression of pure panic on his face. I opened the door to see who it was, but no one was there. He was clearly scared by this, and said, "Is he back?" My blood ran cold, and I asked, "Is who back? What do you mean?" Connor looked over my shoulder, and then sank down into his bed, pulling the duvet up to his mouth. I turned around to see what he was looking at, but there was still no one there. "Tell him to go away," Connor said in a hushed, scared voice. I tried to reassure him that there was no one there, and left his bedside lamp on just before leaving the room. I went downstairs and sat outside on the patio with a cup of coffee. It was in the middle of January, and around 2 outside, but I felt like I had to get out of the house for a little while. After about 40 minutes, I went back inside and washed my cup in the sink, dried it, and put it back in the cupboard. Beneath the cupboard was a locked security drawer where all the sharp knives are kept until needed. The drawer was open slightly. This was obviously a major issue, as none of the residents were allowed to access the knife drawer without supervision. I counted the knives and realized that there was one missing. I woke up the sleep-in staff and told her the situation, and we began a search. Nearly 2 hours later, we still haven't found this missing knife, so we decided to just keep our guard up and make sure that none of the residents were hiding it. 2 hours later, at around 5:30 a.m., the alarm sounded. It was the door to the spare room again. I went up to go check it out and found that the door was locked. How could the alarm have been activated by the door opening if the door was still locked? I went inside and turned the light on. To this day, I still have no explanation for what I found, and I often think about this incident. The bed had been pushed from its usual place and was against the wall, and the wardrobe doors were open. There were screws and nails all over the floor, but nothing was broken. But the most disturbing part, in the middle of the room, there was a child's doll, a gold bracelet, and a missing knife from the kitchen. The doll was an old-style baby doll. My guess was that it was made in the 50s from the style of clothing and the overall look of the doll. The bracelet was simple, but old-looking. I left everything as it was and reported it to the manager as soon as she arrived. No one ever claimed that the bracelet belonged to them, and it was taken to a charity shop soon after, along with the doll. After the doll and bracelet were removed from the house, James seemed to calm down and never mentioned a little girl or stood around in the dark again. I still don't have an explanation for everything that has happened, and sometimes think that it was just a combination of strange behavior from a young autistic boy, and the fact that the house was just old. But on the other hand, a lot of stuff happened that I can't explain logically. My only regret now is that the doll and bracelet are gone, and can't be examined or identified. Maybe it was paranormal, who knows? But now I work my day shifts, and do not plan on working night shifts again anytime soon. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.